I want to thank my colleague from Illinois, Senator Duckworth, for inviting me to join her on the floor to discuss what's happening in our state. And before I do, I want to make sure it is well known for those who are following this debate to explain how she became my Senate colleague. There was a day some 20 years ago when I was given 2 tickets to the presidential State of the Union address. And my staff asked me if there was any particular guest I'd like to invite. I said, no, why don't you call out to Walter Reed Military Hospital and see if there's an Illinois veteran who can come and join us. They told me shortly after that they'd found someone who was coming. I didn't know that person. Her name was Tammy Duckworth, and she was in full dress uniform when she came into my office. It had been merely a few weeks since her helicopter had been shot down over Iraq, and she'd gone through some terrible surgeries and recovery. But she came into my office with a large smile on her face and her husband, Brian, pushing her wheelchair. That was how we met. She was my guest at the State of the Union address. We became friends. I became the ombudsman for Walter Reed. She had soldiers calling me from all over the United States asking for help, and I didn't regret it one bit. It was an honor to do it. So I worked up the courage to ask her if she would consider running for Congress. And she said to me, I'd have to talk it over with Brian. And I thought, I've got a live one here. She sounds like she's interested. And she was. Her first try for office was not successful for Congress, but she later became head of the Veterans Administration for the state of Illinois, and then ran successfully to serve with me in Congress as a member of the House. When there was a vacancy available for the U.S. Senate seat, I not only encouraged her, but endorsed her and did everything I could to help. I'm honored to have her as my colleague. She's an extraordinary person, has more bravery than any 10 people I know. And she has shown her devotion to this country by serving in the Guard for over 20 years, 23 years? 23 years in the Guard. So when it comes to issues involving the Guard, there's no better expert who's ever served in the United States Senate. Illinois is lucky, America's lucky to have Tammy Duckworth, and I'm lucky to be able to join her today. We're proud of our heritage in the state of Illinois. We call it the land of Lincoln. And I recall an incident that's worth repeating. In 1858, Abraham Lincoln gave a speech in Edwardsville, Illinois. That's downstate near St. Louis. In this speech, he asked, quote, "What constitutes the bulwark of our liberty and independence?" Lincoln emphasized that it was not America's army or the power of our weapons. The founder of the Republican Party, Abraham Lincoln, said that it is, quote, "the preservation of the spirit which prizes liberty as the heritage of all men in all lands everywhere." This is what is responsible for the maintenance of our freedoms. How the Republican Party has changed from those early days. Yesterday, President Trump deployed 500 National Guard troops to our state of Illinois. The president ignored the pleas from elected officials across Illinois that these deployments were unnecessary, unwanted, and a dangerous escalation of a situation the president himself has created. Leaders of the Chamber of Commerce and businesses in our state held a press conference and begged the president, don't send in the troops. You're peddling a message which is not true. It is not unsafe in Illinois. People there are proud to be part of that state. We know we're not perfect. Like every other place, we can be better and safer. But the use of Guard troops from Illinois or even from Texas is totally unnecessary and creates the wrong impression. That message was clear from the business leaders in my state, but President Donald Trump didn't care what they had to say. He wanted to deploy our nation's military to Illinois to spread fear and sow chaos. And in both those efforts, sad to say, he's succeeding. The president has no legal basis for deploying federal troops to Illinois against the wishes of the Illinois governor. There is no rebellion or insurrection happening in our state. Americans have the right under the First Amendment to protest this administration's cruel and misguided immigration policy. There is no room for violence whatsoever in this exchange of information and points of view, but it is part of our constitutional guarantee. And there is no argument, as some of my colleagues claim during our Judiciary Committee markup meeting this morning, that this is anything like the civil rights era of uses of National Guard by multiple presidents to enforce desegregation laws when segregationist governors in the South were defying federal law and court orders. President Dwight David Eisenhower, a general himself, federalized the Arkansas National Guard after the governor outright refused to comply with the law and was preventing the Little Rock Nine from entering previously all-white Central High School following the Supreme Court's ruling in Brown versus Board of Education. There is no argument, no evidence whatsoever that the governor of Illinois is disobeying any federal law or court order. There is no historical analogy between the situation in the 1970s, 60s rather, and the situation in Illinois today. In fact, the current administration has sued Illinois to attempt to commandeer state and local law, state law, and force Illinois to implement this administration's immigration policies. Courts have repeatedly found that Illinois does not have a responsibility to implement federal immigration laws. There is no statute or provision of the Constitution that allows the president to use the National Guard as props in his political theater or to suppress constitutionally protected dissent against his inhumane immigration crackdown. In addition, the Trump administration has recklessly surged hundreds of federal law enforcement officers who are employing increasingly aggressive tactics against immigrants and their families and those suspected of being immigrants. They have said quite boldly, we are looking for people who look like they're subject to our jurisdiction. They have pulled FBI, DEA, and ATF agents from their assignments to carry out the president's immigration agenda, taking them away from their mission to combat crimes like terrorism, gun violence, human trafficking, and drug smuggling. How does this make America safer? We all know the litany that Donald Trump has repeated over and over again at political rallies and meetings since he was reelected as president. He is trying to stop murderers, rapists, terrorists, criminally insane people, and sexual predators from coming into this country. Look what's happening with this mass deportation effort that he's authored. Over 70% of those who have been detained by ICE so far, over 70%, have no criminal record whatsoever, none whatsoever. This is not about stopping crime. This is about going after immigrants. If the Trump administration truly wanted to help my city of Chicago and our state of Illinois, it wouldn't defy Illinois elected leaders. It would work with us. It would restore the millions of dollars it suspended in crime prevention and public safety grants. How can this president say with a straight face that he wants to reduce crime in our state and cut back the very programs that law enforcement counts on to train and be prepared and be effective in the field in reducing crime? He's chosen to put boots and guns on our street and to call in the military from Texas. At the end of the day, these deployments are about President Trump and Stephen Miller's personal agenda to send troops primarily into blue cities and to deport immigrants without any criminal history at the expense of national security and public safety. Nearly a quarter of all FBI agents, a quarter of them, 1 out of 4, are now focused on immigration. How can this possibly make America safer? And the tactics that are being used by ICE and others in support of the president's mission are outrageous. On Tuesday, September 30th, there was a raid in the middle of the night on an apartment house in South Shore in the city of Chicago. 300 ICE agents flew in Black Hawk helicopters and rappelled down to the roof of an apartment building. It was a scene made for the movies, and that's exactly what it was. They ransacked the apartments of the people living there, crashed down their doors and pulled them out of bed, lined them up in the street. They bound the children with ties, plastic ties like handcuffs, and they decided to make it all a movie production for television and video. It was supposedly to stop drug activities by gangs. No evidence whatsoever has been produced to that. It was a horrible scene. I'm sure these children will never forget as long as they live. Being pulled out of bed in the middle of the night and watching your parents being interrogated, arrested, and detained. That is the idea of this administration of enforcing the law. It just goes too far. Steve Miller, the president's domestic advisor, is the architect of this travesty. For any of you who think that these deployments may not affect you, it's just Illinois' problem, you're wrong. The very act undermines our Constitution and the belief in liberty above all. As President Lincoln warned us in that same speech in Edwardsville, destroy this spirit of liberty and you planted the seeds of despotism at your own doors. While the Guard is in Illinois now, it could be in your state next. It could be your family taken from their homes and their beds in the middle of the night in an indiscriminate raid. Does it sound preposterous? 2200 South Shore apartment building, people can tell you it's not preposterous. It's actually what happened. Have tear gas and guns pointed at you for speaking out. Congress must act and speak out against this increasingly authoritarian administration. We are a co-equal branch of government, and it's time we acted like one. I implore my Republican colleagues, I know their loyalty to President Trump, but I implore them to join Senator Duckworth and myself and describe these deployments for what they are: an illegal, immoral power grab by a president determined to consolidate his power and stifle any dissent. If we here in this Senate chamber, fortunate enough to represent the people of this country, will not stand up, then who will? Mr. President, once again, I want to thank my colleague, Senator Duckworth, for calling us down to the Senate floor to raise this issue. She and I are hoping that if the Senate schedule allows, we'll be able to get back to Illinois this weekend and have an opportunity to learn even more about this grave situation. In the meantime, I ask people involved to show courage, to understand that the odds are against them, and the people who are trying to harass them are well armed and can be very serious in what they do. But America's values will prevail over this president and over this situation, and my state of Illinois will return to a situation where it's not being invaded by the Guard of other states. Incidentally, let me close by saying this. I have no animus against the members of the Guard, either in Illinois or in Texas. They are good men and women who put their hands in the air and swore an oath to our Constitution and to serve our country. They are in a situation where they're being used, unfortunately, for a bad circumstance for this president. But we need them, and I continue to look forward to working with them in the future. I yield the floor.